to kick us off, I would love to take the next 5 minutes or so to do a quick icebreaker with everyone. And it is super, super simple. The questions that I'd love for you to answer are: what is your name, your neighborhood, and what is one way that you are taking care of yourself and others this week, or others this week? And anyone can go. We won't get through everyone because it'll just be 5 minutes, but you can just unmute yourself and share your answer. I'll go first just to model it. My name is Ellie. I live in Bridgeport, and one way that I have been taking care of myself this week is making sure I take advantage of the sun when we have it and going on walks. So if you would like to share, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and we'll just do this for the next 5 minutes, get to know each other a little better before we get started.
Sheila, Hyde Park, and like Ellie, I am walking a lot.
Hi, I'm Natalie, neighborhood East Garfield Park, and I am eating what I want to eat. I had not been before, and now I'm like, forget it. If I want a piece of bread, I'll eat it. So that's what I'm doing.
I wanted to say that I've been taking pictures of the little pieces of nature in my forest, like mushrooms that never have grown in my yard before.
So now with that little bit of grounding, I'd love to turn to our panel for the evening. So once again, just want to share, we are joined by Sebastian Hidalgo and Jackie Serrato. To kick us off, I would love, Sebastian and Jackie, if you can briefly just introduce yourselves, share, what your work looks like nowadays, and what your relationship to Little Village or the Southwest Side is. Sebastian, maybe you can kick us off.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sebastian. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I think it's a really important one. I grew up in Pilsen on 23rd Street, and my relationship to La Villita is the same as my relationship growing up on 23rd Street. What my work looks like in the last year, yeah. Is it a year? Yeah, it is a year. It looks a lot like doing visual research, reading a ton of books, reading as much as possible on Chicago. Even though I'm born here and I have that experience, it's never a bad idea to catch up on what's been said about your neighborhood, about your people, your culture. And that's primarily what it looks like within the last year, along with taking pictures for a variety of news outlets, COVID-related stuff, inequity-related stuff, everything that requires some visual context to it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jackie Serrato. I call myself a barrio journalist, which means that, I'm a journalist from the neighborhood. I was born and raised in the Little Village neighborhood on 26th and Sawyer. Adam Toledo was killed on 24th and Sawyer, 2 blocks away from where I came up from my stomping grounds. So this has definitely hit very close to home. And it's been interesting, right, to both be on the inside, right, in the sense that, I'm hearing what everybody is talking about within the neighborhood, what neighbors are saying, what people who knew Adam are saying, and just how the whole incident is being interpreted internally. But at the same time, as a media person, taking a step back and distancing myself a little bit from the incident so that I can, as best as possible, have an objective view on the events that took place, and also to analyze how the city at large is coping with the recent events, with the killing of Adam Toledo and other police killings that have happened recently. We at Southside Weekly, we put out an issue that was dedicated to the life of Adam Toledo. And at the time, this was before the Copa video was made public. So in a way, it was a risky move that we were taking. But we understood that we were talking about a 13-year-old and that the media was already going to take care of criminalizing him. So we wanted to bring some balance to that and remind people that this was a child, right? And that, his life and his death are representative of the environment that he came up in. And as residents, as taxpayers, to some extent, we're all responsible for what happens to our children. And I can go more into that as we move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and Jackie, just jumping right off into that point that you made about media sort of criminalizing Adam, I want to take a moment to just unpack some of the harmful narratives that have emerged around Adam's killing. I am wondering, who is crafting these narratives and why, to what end, and what is their impact?
I think it's important to understand how crime is reported in the first place. As many people here are already aware, after an incident takes place, there is a police report, right, that an officer fills out. And then internal affairs, which is like the PR, the PR department of the Chicago Police Department, they turn that police report into a press release that is then, sent to the media, the established media. So then the media in turn takes the police account as truth for the most part and prints it, sometimes verbatim. So, the police killing of the 13-year-old was initially reported by the media in very general terms, talking about a quote unquote armed confrontation, because that is the phrase that the CPD used, that it was an armed confrontation. So when I think of of any type of confrontation, I am thinking that there is some type of exchange taking place, right? So the shot spotter was activated in Little Village, and this is technology that has microphones and algorithms, and it's very high tech devices that can hear when gunshots go off in a certain part of the city. So the shot spotter was activated in Little Village. The police were immediately deployed to the area, and they essentially arrived to the scene with their guns drawn. So they pursue Adam Toledo, right, who's trying to run away. They tell him to stop 2 or 3 times. At the same time, like shining their strobe light on him. And Adam turns with his hands up, and he gets shot in the chest. His hands are he's empty-handed essentially, and of course there are debates about whether he was holding a gun moments leading up to his death, and a gun was found on the scene. However, at no point was a weapon ever raised. At no point was a weapon ever pointed at any officer. I think what's interesting is that his boyhood innocence was immediately put into question. There were suggestions that perhaps he brought it upon himself, right? People started to blame his mom and his family situation. And this is not new, right? We were here about 7 years ago with Laquan McDonald, right? Where his youthful innocence was called into question, where his childhood and his family situation was scrutinized. And like other police shootings of Black and brown youth, right, we see social media photos of them emerge, right, where they're either holding a gun, which is a Second Amendment right, or they're smoking weed, right, or they're in situations that are meant, or that, whether it's the media or whether it's society as a whole, these images surfacing are meant to criminalize our young people. But I think what's really important is that in the Adam Toledo case, is that his parents were not notified that he had been shot by police until 48 hours later or so. The police report did not disclose that he was 13. So the family essentially found out at the same time as the public that a 13-year-old had been the victim of this incident. And that's when, the public had a range of emotions in response. People were understandably upset. There were a lot of questions. People were traumatized essentially by the situation. And it took a while for COPA to show the video to the family and then to release it to the public. But before the COPA video was released, there had already been a narrative built around Adam Toledo being a quote unquote gangbanger, which, by the way, he was not in the gang database. Otherwise, I think the city would have possibly mentioned that. And it wasn't just the police department police report. It was also the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. One of their prosecutors, I believe it was in bond court, mentioned on the record, right, that Adam Toledo had his hand on the right side of his waist and that he was holding a gun, right? So all of these are official accounts shaping the narrative before the video, before the evidence is even made public. So I really think it's important to understand how the story could be manipulated very, very early on. When we think that facts are coming out, they're not always facts. Sometimes they are very much influenced by people who are in positions of power. So I'll stop there, and I'm going to let Sebastian talk.
I think you really touch on a lot of good points there. And my biggest concern, my biggest worry is just the role of photography in all of this. You have police body cam footage that is not going anywhere. And the role of photographers and photography has never been as important as it is today. Now, photography it's a complicated relationship because it's always had this relationship to tragic videos, the tragicness of it. And I even questioned how that video was released, what was shown, what was frozen, what was edited. You have those big red arrows that point to specific things. And that really gets intake for its face value. It doesn't share what Jackie was saying, the spot scanner or the fact that a 13-year-old was shot and killed by police. I think those things often get missed when tragedy is at the forefront of the people's perspective. I worry that, while more of these videos will come out to hold police accountable, people will become too desensitized without it being balanced. Now, photography can really play a crucial role in that, and really trying to figure out, like, what are the facts? You have a 13-year-old, right? Just for an example, you have to look at the demographic of Little Village. It's history. It's predominantly made up of young people, and that's why it was felt at the heart of what makes Little Village a Little Village. You bring family values into that. 13-year-olds. I remember my mom prepping me growing up to always be afraid of the police. It was never like a boogeyman. It was always, I'm going to call the cops if you don't go to sleep, right? Which to me at the time, I thought it was, a joke. But when I grew up, I realized that that level of I want to say tuning or raising a child to be weary of the police came from a very fearful place. And we're seeing that in real time now, right? So, I believe that we would have to start treating these videos, as tragic as they are, as police quotes, as police facts, because it's also they also operate very similarly to how photographers operate. They go, they take some photos. Photography is naturally subjective. So there's a lot of information that's excluded. There's a lot of blurry lines between what is considered factual and emotional information, or in other words, art and journalism. And things are only shown with intention. Now, as photographers, we can also play a role in providing the thoroughness of Little Village and its facts. And, I think we can do a lot about that. And I know that we're going to talk about just what we can do in order to kind of balance the tragedy of those videos. But I'll wait until there's time for that.
Yeah, thank you both. I want to shift our attention from some of the harm that we're discussing now and talk about some reporting that really prioritizes the needs of those who are most impacted by the issue. So, Jackie, the Southside Weekly has put out pieces on Adam Toledo's killing, and not to mention your ongoing coverage of police violence that I find to be exemplary for this topic. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the editorial decisions that you made as a newsroom about that coverage? Like what questions did you confront?
Yeah, so as I had mentioned earlier, we dedicated an issue to Adam Toledo's life and his case having been killed by police. The cover of the issue was a beautiful illustration that depicts Adam Toledo with his eyes look like they're smiling. You can see that his face is that of a boy, of a young teenager. The colors that were selected were very, very soft, very juvenile. And it was important, right, to portray Adam Toledo as a 13-year-old. I think that was definitely the goal of our visual team at Southside Weekly. And it's something that I think all of us editors at Southside Weekly felt was really crucial. We didn't do as much reporting because we were getting reactions from the community. We ran a couple of op-eds from community members from Little Village and Back of the Yards, which are very similar communities in terms of their makeup. They're both immigrant, working class, and very industrial or post-industrial. So, we ran a piece, an op-ed called "We Are Adam Toledo," which was the lived experience of a Southside youth who, grew up in a single family, in a home with a single mother, who didn't have a lot of resources and started hanging out with the wrong crowd. But he spoke of, different adults who came into his life and encouraged them to get a job, to pursue more productive activities, to get an internship. And, he was eventually able to do more productive things with his life. And, now he's a community leader in Back of the Yards. I'm talking about Berto Aguayo. So when we say we are Adam Toledo, I think we're talking about, I think we're saying that in two senses. The first one being that there are a lot of young people, Black and brown youth, who may identify and do identify with Adam Toledo and just the lack of opportunities in the community, the lack of city investment in racialized communities. But also when we say we are Adam Toledo, we're also taking responsibility, right, as taxpayers, because this city only spends 1% of its budget on violence prevention and only spends single-digit percentages on, on social services, on mental health, on programs and jobs for our young people. So, you could look at this, different ways. You can look at it as, young kids taking personal responsibility for the situations and the conditions that they live in, but also, they can't be fully responsible for the environment that they grew up in. I think we all have to take some degree of responsibility, because as a city, we're not investing in our young people. A lot of our young people are feeling lost. They're not feeling optimistic about the future. And so they're going out and finding a sense of belonging, a sense of agency, with other groups of people that look like them, but within contexts that can be very harmful. So I think I kind of went on a tangent there. But aside from the two op-eds that we published, which, by the way, included a critique of the columnist Eric Zorn. I believe he's a columnist from the Chicago Tribune, who was very critical of Adam, even as he was telling us, that the facts weren't out yet. He was still speculating about his life and suggesting that, perhaps the shooting had been justified, when he also wrote another column about, that kid, Kyle Rittenhouse, right, who was this white teenager, right, who was openly carrying and using an AK-47, and who actually killed people. And he was actually given the benefit of the doubt by this same columnist, but by the media, by a lot of media sources, and the police department. So the op-eds were also a response to that particular columnist. And in addition to that, we included a timeline of CPD killings of children who are under 16. And we noticed that there's definitely a pattern. This isn't new. This goes back decades. And we've seen an uptick of CPD killings of young people as of the 2000s. I don't know if this is a trend that is going to grow or get worse, but I think it's something that needs to get looked into.
Thank you. So Jackie, you've already mentioned a couple ingredients of reporting on this story and on police violence more broadly that make for more successful coverage. For example, the decision to elevate voices of people living in Little Village or nearby. I'm wondering, what are some of the other ingredients for a successful story around either the Adam Toledo story in particular or police violence, taking a broader view? Sebas. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, Jackie. No, you're good.
We can't take the police account at face value. We need to seek out, if possible, eyewitnesses, people who were close to the incident and possibly witnessed it themselves. We need to rely on body cam footage, and it needs to be released immediately. It shouldn't have to wait 2, 3, 4 weeks for it to come out. And we don't need CPD's commentary on the actual video footage. Just give us the raw footage. I think we can all draw our own conclusions. Go ahead, Sebastian.
Yeah, I as much as I really admire the work that the Southside Weekly does, and I also want to shout out other journalists that have been doing work in La Villita, Maria Zamudio and Carlos Ballesteros. They've been really looking at it from different angles, and I think that's also important. But I'm also, I also worry about, or I'm curious about just how people read the news themselves. I think as journalists, we forget that we're always kind of dissecting information and trying to expand that, and that's our job. That's what we got to do. But, somebody who works like an hourly job, comes home tired, probably doesn't want to read the news and or doesn't want to look at the news. And I worry that when they see videos of its just rawness of it, it's always going to be traumatizing. But if we can, guide people and just say like, this is, how an option to read the news, or this is how you can dissect information by viewing this one video or viewing this one fact. I think that's also something that is crucial even in as journalists. But the photography aspect of it is something that I always worry about, because I feel like if it's just the video that we're only seeing, it leaves too much room for it to be the facts of things. And there are other visuals that need to play a role in just kind of contextualizing that. And, it could be anything from spending time in Little Village, getting to know people in a way that is authentic and based on everything that you've researched, and just spending as much time in the communities that you want to serve as possible. I think as a photographer, I try to deepen my photography even more by conducting surveys. Not anything scientific. It's more about, I'm going to generate a list of questions about this particular thing and just generate people's opinions and let that inform the way that I take pictures. Right. And it's just an effort just to be as thorough with the visual information as much as I am with the research elements of information. That's a crucial thing that I feel like is often missed in newsrooms. And a big part of that is because there's just a lack of photo editors. Excluding the major media publications that are out there, photo editing it's almost non-existent within other realms. You have great photo editors, but I fear that it's not simply enough. And I think if we are guided, or if there's more pathways to photo editing, we can cover that visual information to accompany horrific videos like the ones that that is becoming common in police body cam footage, right? It should never be the case, but in the reality that we live in now, that is something that I encourage everybody just to kind of look into. It's to hold visuals, is to weigh them as much as words, because they're also a part of what makes journalism.
I can also respect, newsrooms' decisions not to show the video, not to show COPA videos, because they can definitely be traumatizing, especially for the community that's most affected. However, in the case of Adam, the community really wanted to see the video, and a lot of it had to do with just this police narrative that wasn't making sense locally. Like, people had too many questions. People wanted to see the video just so they could see if the police was really telling the truth. And I think we should also respect that, right? Like, why should the city or the police department decide, when they're going to make the evidence available to the family or to the public? I think that's something that shouldn't be up to them. And especially when it comes to police abuse, police misconduct, it's important for the public to be aware and to have access to the evidence.
Definitely.
So you are already hitting on some of these points. I do want to elevate a couple comments in the chat. So Ruby says, speaking of youth getting brutalized on the streets, why would reporters share these triggering images on Twitter? Shares that in particular, Jackie, you saw a tweet that you sent that had a photo of Adam. Asks, how can we be genuine in our reporting violence in our Black and Brown communities if we showcase their trauma online? And Natalie says, as a Black person, I don't feel like viewing police killings does anything for me. So wondering if you have responses to those comments besides what you've already shared for both.
I think those perspectives are completely valid. So, before COPA released the video of Adam's shooting, there was a leaked screen grab of the video that was already being circulated on Facebook and Instagram among community members, right? And what's interesting is that people were interpreting the image in different ways. So, I felt that it was important to tweet this image out, hoping to pressure COPA to release the footage, because they kept coming up with excuses as to why they couldn't make this footage available to the public. At first, they were blaming the family, but on my end, I was hearing that the family wanted this footage to be released. So, after I tweeted that image under my own account, not Southside Weekly's, it got around even more. And the next day, COPA released a video. I'm not saying it was a direct result of me publishing that image, but I do think it might have had something to do with it. Also, I didn't really need the image to be verified because I was extremely familiar with the alley where Adam was shot. I had already seen multiple photos of Adam that his family had shown to me. So as soon as I saw the image and I saw the timestamp, it seemed very authentic to me. And although it may seem like a risk, I feel very confident that this was a genuine screenshot from the COPA footage, and that perhaps putting it on Twitter, where other journalists and other powerful people are at, that perhaps it could have pressured COPA to release the footage.
Sebastian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that also touches on the base of the power that photography can have. I mean, even if it was a screenshot or a video, that's photography. But I think that I worry about people's health, is their mental capacity to view those images, to a point where if they become too desensitized to it, it's just not going to have any weight anymore. Those videos are always going to come out. Either way, there's nothing that we can really do about that, at least me personally, as an independent photographer. But what I can do is balance images out with something more thorough, so that they're not left for misinformation or conspiracy theories or premature opinions to just kind of run rampant. Photography can really just pile that information on so that people can do whatever they want with that, with information that is factual, desensitizing and or traumatizing. Yeah. I mean, that's the nature of it. And I think this isn't anything new. Photography was used as evidence even during the Vietnam War. You had graphic images, you had all these things, but the photographers taking the images always wanted to balance that out, and in most cases, photography there's a whole team behind it of what gets published and what doesn't get published. And usually the case when things get published, they're very violent. Without balance, people lose interest very quickly. And I think in Adam Toledo's case, we're talking about it in Chicago all the time, but everybody else, it was last week's news, and other people wanted to move on because it was traumatizing. They don't want to sit with that. But I think we provide a visual information that kind of keeps people engaged, powerful, compelling images, emotional images, that's something important that we want that as viewers and as journalists.
So before we head off into our exercise for the evening, I want to ask, I imagine that as people witness stories being misreported and harmful narratives being propagated, they might be wondering what they can do in response. So what is something anybody could do to try and hold a news outlet accountable? What are some of the ways that you can convince journalists to change something?
You can write letters to editors. And those are, if the Chicago Tribune, they accept letters. And if, that's something that people can can do if they feel compelled to do so. Or they could pick up a camera too,
Yeah, definitely. We love to get feedback from our readers. We want to know how they're reacting to our stories. If they have suggestions on how we can improve our coverage. So we don't run letters to the editor, but we do run op-eds. And you don't have to be a quote unquote white collar professional to be able to write an op-ed. If you have lived experience, if you have a perspective, if you can back up your claims, we can publish you. So that's just one way. Other ways is to, of course, get into journalism, get into writing, get into media making, like Sebastian just mentioned. I think, I mean, when it comes to the case or seeking justice for George Floyd, it was a civilian, a regular resident, a young woman, who decided to take the footage, to take video of George Floyd, of his last moments before police ended his life. So, as regular everyday citizens, we can always, pull out our phone and we can record, we can document how our community's conditions, how they're being treated, any instance of abuse, but also of celebration. And, I think it is important to balance, the bad with some good stuff. And there's a lot of good stuff happening in our neighborhoods. So, documenting everything that's happening in our community, that also counts as media. And that can also be empowering for our communities.
Thank you so much to you both for this grounding before we move into a bit of a more hands-on exercise. I want to just pause here and ask if anyone has any final questions before we move on.
All right. I had a question really quick for Jackie. How do you navigate, you mentioned the negative comments that, people were starting to articulate about, Adam, or about the family, or, about the gangs in the neighborhood. Like, how do you navigate that as a journalist and as someone who manages, a Facebook page as well?
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks for your question. Yeah, it's been difficult. It's difficult not to get emotional, right? But when it comes to La Villita neighborhood in particular, it's very important to understand its history as a neighborhood, but also the history of Mexicans as a people, right? Mexicans as a people, as a collective, carry a lot of trauma. Mexicans as a collective are colonized people. These are Native Americans that were effectively colonized about 500 years ago. And there's a lot of historical and ancestral trauma that we still continue to carry. Add to that trauma the fact that we just had 4 years of Trump, who was actively denigrating and actively criminalizing Mexican people and brown people, right? And you get like this toxic mix of people who are traumatized, who don't want to ruffle feathers, who want to fly under the radar because there is currently a system that is attacking them, or they're feeling attacked, right? So there's definitely a large sector of the Little Village community who want to feel accepted. They want to feel accepted by society, who, don't want to be thought of as criminals, who want to blend into the mainstream, without having a critical lens of how they're perceived as racialized or as ethnic people, right? Or many times being completely ignorant of their history, and not understanding how systems have historically worked against, Mexicans, the Mexican collective. Let's just call it that. Add to that feelings of anti-Blackness, which are very real. There's, I feel like the community as a whole is dealing with so many conflicting ideas and conflicting feelings. And as a journalist, as someone who had the privilege to go to a 4-year college, someone who has the privilege of being well-read and knowledgeable of our history, I take it upon myself to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with people. I take it upon myself to attend community meetings and try to understand the local perspective, to inform others of, historical facts that they may have never ever considered in their lives. There's just so many internal conversations that are happening, as everything else is happening. So, I don't have, I'm sorry, I don't have like the right answer for you or a straight answer for you. But the point is that there's a lot of internal work that is happening. And as a journalist, there's only so much that I can do. If I want to cover my community as quote unquote objectively as possible, I'm careful not to get overly involved emotionally, if that makes any sense. It's a very weird and difficult balance to keep.
Yeah. Can I just add to that a little bit, Jackie? I really think that there's a lot of in books, especially in academia, everything about Chicago or the Mexican experience in particular. There's a sentence that's in every single book that says it is often underrepresented and misunderstood, and that's as far as the sentence goes. And for somebody that kind of grew up in Pilsen, I realized that we have terms like más calladito te ves más bonito as like a harmful thing for us. But I think in most cases, people know about the things that they're being oppressed by. Now, the challenge is the determinants that they are often faced with, low paying jobs, working 7 days out of the week, dealing with asthma. I think as somebody that grew up in the neighborhood, wanting to invest in those narratives and trying to speak to those narratives, you often find yourself very close to the issues that you're trying to address. And as a photographer, that grants me the ability to be really emotionally involved for the sake of images, right? And then being a little bit distant for the sake of trying to find as much information as possible into something like that. But I think the challenges are there. And I think it's just really hard to just give people the time to really say, hey, you have options here. Hey, your solutions come from a very pure place. Often those solutions come from, in particularly in my case, Mexico, or the native peoples in Nuevo León. Those ideas are often said in public meetings and in public discussion, but they don't really have any teeth because there's this misinformation that, linguistics isolation or a misunderstanding of what people define solution as. So there's like nothing really happens. And Dr. David Ansel really kind of capitalized it or said it better than I can say it. He said, this isn't history repeating itself. It's just history continuing to do its dirty work. And that kind of stuck with me a little bit, because it's absolutely true. Is that we've been dealing with this for so long, and now it almost feels like somebody pressed the restart button just so to continue forward. But I try not to undermine my community members. I think people are very knowledgeable about the solutions that they need, except they just don't really have a place in that table. And that's where the problems come from. So I think, as journalists, I like the term barrio journalist because it really puts you in that position. I'm well read. I have certain privileges. I also have certain traumas that are very similar to a lot of people. I can go to somebody across the aisle and be like, hey, let me have a cup of coffee with you sometime and let me try to explain this to you in the most thorough way possible. Here's some images. That's essentially what I can do best. I wish I could do more. I'm trying to do more. But it's really hard. And people have, they have their ideas, and I think those should be celebrated and made real.
Thank you both, Sebastian and Jackie, for speaking on that. And thank you to everyone in the chat leaving comments and questions. I feel like you're really helping us animate the dialogue here. So now that we have heard from two journalists about this issue, we want to turn it to you and ask you how you think media outlets should cover police violence. So to do this, we'll be breaking you up into groups of about 3 to 4 people and asking you to come up with some declarations. Declarations are just statements that express how you expect media outlets to cover this topic. So a declaration, for example, could be media outlets and reporters must be accountable to their own racial biases, just to give an example. Welcome back, everyone. We'll start to do a little share out in a little bit. All right, and I think that was the minute ending because everyone is coming back in. Welcome back. I would love to take the next of little bit of time that we have together to just hear what declarations your groups came up with. And if you didn't get a chance to come up with any declarations, which is totally fine. I know 20 minutes goes by super fast. Just want to hear some of the reactions, thoughts, anything that struck you from your conversation. Anyone want to share?
I could share real quick. I made an effort to just kind of summarize the conversation a little bit. So I'm gonna try my best not to butcher it. But here it goes. News needs to be 360. It's about it's about the lived experience because the lived experience is the balance. News should be nuanced. We expect reporters to ask deeper questions and get to the root of each story and neighborhood. It's about being part of the solution and not being a part of the problem. I hope I didn't butcher it.
Who else would like to share?
I can go for our group. So I was in a group with Susan, Terry, and Jesus. And I'm really sorry if my notes are sloppy, but we had a really good discussion about things that we would like to see. And a lot of it does start with accountability for newsrooms. Like one of the things is and speaks to things that have already been said, but just a desire to see reporting on these things in an authentic voice, whether it's having a journalist that can speak to the experience and someone with those with a conviction and desire to really hear from the community. And so that also means like being deliberate in how you're sourcing the story. And just being willing to say, like, actually, we don't need this quote from the FOP president. Do you know what I mean? And really, and going off of that, another thing was knowing when to step back. Jesus brought a great point up about seeing families of those whose children have been lost to police violence. They're at these vigils, they're mourning. And there are journalists, whether it's reporters or photojournalists, and they're they're being photographed, they're being asked questions, and there are people who are, whether family or not, they're grieving, and it just kind of journalists knowing when it's time to step back and not push and really give people space. And of course, there's a whole conversation about ethics there. And then the third thing was a discussion about, how we can hold journalists and newsrooms accountable. And one thing is sort of calling more folks into conversations like these. Are people at the very top, like the editors, the ones on the masthead, like, are they going to, discussions like these, right? And the need for that to happen. And of course, that takes a lot of self-initiative. So I understand that, but it's just how impactful that can be to hear from people who are just saying, like, your coverage is traumatizing us. And here's, what we don't like about it and how we think it can change. And so again, I know it also takes self-initiation to sort of seek out ways that they can change. But looking at my notes, sorry if I rambled, but I think that kind of sums up why everywhere we got to. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anyone else? I think we have time for one more group to share.
I can share our group. So we talked about the importance of centering the communities, including that the people in your reporting the people doing the reporting should be from or familiar with the areas, and the history of that should be included in the context of the stories, including like the history of the neighborhoods, the history of, in this case, Mexican people, as well as we were talking about including the political context and the moment that we're in that carried over from the last year and the last 4 years. That there should be diversity in your sources, including of race, age, income, and also when you report on an urgent story like this, that it's important to not be extractive in order. So when you engage people who just go through something like this, maintain relationships when they do share with you. So keep following up with them and how they may respond to the trauma and how they, recover and heal, or decisions that they make in response to it. And then when you bring up sensitive issues such as anti-Blackness or divisions on issues of policing within communities, give space to understanding where these tensions come from in one-on-one personal conversations.
Thank you, Alex. It's really warming to hear everyone's thoughts. I've just been very quickly trying to take notes on everyone's contributions because they are great, and I would love to capture them. So if your group didn't get a chance to write down any of your declarations, we do want to hang on to those again because it really helps us be responsive to your needs. So if you have a minute, just feel free to drop them into either the chat or the agenda. And I will start to close it out for the evening. I know I have kept you all over time already. Just want to start off by thanking everyone who joined today. I again, like I mentioned, I know this is a tricky subject, and I just really appreciate having the space to talk through the impact of narrative with you all. Extra special thanks to Sebastian and Jackie for participating in the panel, sharing your insights. Really appreciate having a journalist perspective so that we can think about how to hold outlets accountable. And that is it for me. Sebastian and Jackie, anything you would like to share before we go?
I'd like to invite people to read Southside Weekly. We have our newspaper is free that you can pick up at any newspaper stand. We also have a website at southsideweekly.com, and we're always accepting contributions. So if you've wanted to be, or if you are a journalist, a writer, an artist, it's a good opportunity to get your name out there, to get your message out there, and to get some exposure too.
Sebastian, I think you're muted. Yeah.
I just want to thank everybody, and if anybody is really interested in photography or in just kind of documenting their own communities, please reach out. I'm more than happy to help give a little guidance. I'm really independent, so I don't have a newspaper to plug, except for the Southside Weekly. You should definitely go read that. But you can always reach me via email, and I'll put it in the chat, or on Twitter, and I'm pretty responsive. So I encourage everybody to do that.
Beautiful. Thank you both. Thanks again to everyone. We'll leave it there, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your Thursday evening. Thanks for spending some of it with us.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.